Here comes the question which motivates the regress argument. Is justification actually possible? Is it really the case that we can at least sometimes be justified in believing the things we do? Right? And if you think the answer is no, then you are a skeptic about justification. Here's one kind of worry you might have. The whole moral language, in fact, the overtly deontological language of justification, in fact, has put some people kind of uncomfortable and say, you know, that's kind of weird. Even in morality, we have this debate about whether we have free will and responsibility because we worry about whether our actions are even under our control. If it turns out that the world is deterministic, then maybe we are, our actions not really under our control, then we really shouldn't be blamed. So likewise, we may have an analogous worry here. And here you don't even need determinism. Right? Plausibly, you may believe that you have free will because you feel like you have free will. Okay, psychologically, at least you'll probably be inclined to think that. But even psychologically, most of the time, we don't say we choose to believe this or choose to believe that. Most of the time. Most beliefs we form are not formed voluntarily. You go in front of the field, go to U-Town, look at the field, and think to yourself, I believe there is a field here. Let me ask you, do you think that belief is formed voluntarily or involuntarily? Look around you. Just look around you. Any of you believe that there's no one in this room right now? Now, so do you all believe that there are people in this room right now? Let me ask you, do you form that belief voluntarily? Can you voluntarily make yourself believe that there's no one in this room right now? I don't even know how to try. Okay? So you may have worries about this, that maybe the justification language is kind of problematic, because what if believing is not like an act of free will? Okay? Here's another worry. So what are these standards of justification again? And by the way, since we're talking about the analogy of morality, all three schools of morality, deontological, consequentialist, and virtue ethical, they all have counterparts in epistemology as well. There is such a thing as virtue epistemology. Okay? So, but let's not worry about that. Let's leave that aside. These are all like side points. Okay? But what are these standards? What are these standards of, right believing? So this is where Zhuangzi comes back and bugs us a second time. He has this really nifty little argument in a chapter of his book. This is a paraphrase, but he says, look, suppose you and I have a disagreement. You believe not P, I believe P, we have a debate. And then there's some stuff there that we don't have to go through, but the basic idea is that surely it can't just be that I talk louder than you or you talk louder than me, and therefore I'm right and you're wrong, or whatever. It has to be that one of us has a justification, right? It has to be that one of us meet the standard. Okay? But whose standards are these? And the way he asks is, who should adjudicate between us? Who should we ask to be the judge? Should it be someone who agrees with you? Or should it be someone who agrees with me? I hope you can see that both of them are not very good options. If you and I have a debate, you believe in not P and I believe in P, right? And in order to adjudicate this debate, we ask someone who already agrees with me, you will say, what, that doesn't help? That doesn't show that you're right and I'm wrong. Right? Then what? If it's not someone who either agrees with you or agrees with me, what if we ask someone who agrees with both of us? Does that really help? Or someone who disagrees with both of us, does that really help? If you really believe not P and I believe P, if you find someone who managed to agree with both of us, in a sense, the guy doesn't even respect either of us. Because we think that we are disagreeing, the guy thinks that somehow we are agreeing. Does that really help? And vice versa for the last guy. Okay? Now, this is a tetralemma. All four options are not palatable. Okay? Here's another worry. Can we ever measure out these standards? Maybe we settled Zhuangzi's problem, we fixed down on certain standards of justification, but there could be worries about whether, as finite creatures with only a finite amount of time on earth, with finite abilities, that we're actually able to measure up to these standards. Now, this one is a bit like, you may worry that, suppose utilitarianism is the right doctrine, then if Peter Singer is right, I got to give all my money away. I'll never be able to do that. Okay? So it's a bit like that, right? You may think that there are good arguments for why a certain moral standard is the right one. Then you realize that, hold on a second, if that's the moral standard, then I'm always blameworthy. I'll never be able to measure up to it. Okay? Now, so these are all different worries you can imagine for justification. But if we are right earlier to say that in order for true belief to count as knowledge, you need justification, then unless we can diffuse all these different problems, then technically what follows? We know nothing. Okay? And it's not just, like, you know nothing, Jon Snow. It's not just like that, right? It's literally like we know nothing. Okay? Okay, if knowledge requires justification, and if these problems cannot be solved, then justification cannot be had, and therefore, in fact, Mary couldn't possibly know that there were eggs in the fridge. Now, I introduce these because they are all interesting topics of their own. You can pursue them. You can go and read up on your own. But today, we're just going to talk about one very powerful argument as to why justification is a huge problem. Okay, it's called the regress argument. Okay, it's not the only argument you can make against the possibility of justification, but it's one of the most powerful. It's one of the oldest as well. Just now I used the term tetralemma, where I say that Zhuangzi's little skeptical argument was in fact a tetralemma. What does that mean? And in fact, the regress argument is a trilemma. What does it mean to say that something is a trilemma? So this is just a terminological thing. Okay? So it's as if you're offering your opponent a choice between three different options, each of which is bad. You can either go on the left and there's boiling water over there. You can go on the right, is a cliff, and then over there is a hammer that will whack you. All right? So you choose your evil. Okay? So if it's two options, then it's a dilemma. If it's four options, it's the tetralemma. And in Indian philosophy, there are some arguments involving 8 different options. They are called, no, never mind. Okay, you get the idea. Okay. Or 4 options is a quadrilemma, and the 8 options is the tetralemma. Now, what's the general form of a trilemma argument? And you should be able to do this for the other cases. It's actually a very simple structure. If it's a trilemma, then you need a premise with 3 options in it, either P or Q or R. Then what you want to do is to show that each of those options lead to some outcome. If P then Z, if Q then Z, if R then Z, therefore you can conclude it's got to be Z. Okay? So the number of lines in the middle there will correspond to whether it's a trilemma, dilemma, tetralemma, quadrilemma, and so on and so forth. So let's look at the regress argument. Now, I've formulated the regress argument in a slightly simpler way compared to the way it was done in the reading, so the numbering of the premises will not be the same. Okay, you can use either one, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you know that you're either reading my formulation of it or the one that Scott Atkins presents at the end of his article. Okay, probably use mine. Mine is easier. Okay, it really is a trilemma. Okay, so the first premise, as you can predict, is that it's a 3-way choice. Look, when you believe something, let's call that proposition P just for convenience. When you believe P, then the claim is this: one of these 3 options got to be true. You either believe it on the basis of a chain of reasons that end in a belief held without further justification. So that's one option. You believe P because you ask, why do you believe P? What gives you justification of P? Then you say, because Q. Then you say, okay, then why do you believe Q again? What's the justification of Q? Then you say R. So one possibility here is it ends in something that somehow is believed without further justification. Okay? Now, I hope you can see a structural analogy between this argument and something we just talked about 2 weeks ago. What argument is this? What is this? What structure? Which other argument has the same structure? The cosmological argument. Okay? Second option, you believe P on the basis of a circular chain of reason. Why do you believe P? Because Q. Why do you believe Q? Because R. Why do you believe R? Because P. Okay? Circular chain of reasons. Or you believe P on the basis of an infinite chain of reasons. Why do you believe P? Because P1. Why do you believe P1? Because P2. Why do you believe P2? P3. And 5 days later, why do you believe P200 and whatever, okay? 275,600, whatever. Then, yeah, well, because you know the next one, right? Right? Okay, so it's got to be one of these three options. Okay? Either you end in a showstopper, self-existent being, non-dependent being, or you do something circular, or you go on forever. Okay, so that's not the end of the argument. This is just premise one. It sets out the three options, right? So let's look at each option. So basically, each of the options is there to, each of these premises, premise 2, 3, and 4, is there to block each of the options. Look, it can't be that if you justifiably believe P, then somehow your chain of reasons ends in something that you believe without further justification. That violates the whole point of saying that it was a justified belief. If you justifiably believe P, and you say you believe P because you believe Q, just to keep it short, and Q you believe without any further justification, then you're basically saying that you believe P without any real justification. Surely the thing that justifies something else has to be itself justified. If it's not itself justified, then how is it supposed to justify the thing that you're trying to justify? Okay? So there goes the first option. Second option, premise 3. If you justifiably believe P, then it can't be that you do so on a circular chain of reason. Again, the idea is kind of similar to in the case of a cosmological argument, but here it may be even simpler. Look, if someone tells you that I believe P, I believe there are eggs in the fridge, and you ask the person, why do you believe that there are eggs in the fridge? Oh, because there are eggs in the fridge, Then you stare at the person, I really need to change my roommate, I really do, right? Okay? And if the circle is expanded a bit larger, I believe P because I believe Q, I believe Q because I believe R, and I believe R because I believe P, it doesn't seem to make it any better. Okay? So the term here is begging the question. You're assuming what remains to be justified. We were asking you, why is it that your belief is justified? You cited something which eventually ended up where you started. Right? If we already knew that your belief is justified, then of course your belief is justified. We already know that. But we were trying to find out whether your belief is justified. Okay? So when you try to justify your belief by citing itself again, that doesn't really help. Okay? The third one, premise 4, if you justifiably believe P, then it can't be that you do so on a chain of reasons that goes on forever, an infinite chain of reasons. Because it can't be that if you say that this belief is justified, and then somehow the chain just goes on and on and on, then it's as if, again, the first one that we asked you about was never justified. Because after all, the first belief, P, was justified only if the next one was justified. But since we don't know whether the last one was justified because there was no last one, so obviously the first one wasn't justified. Right? We don't even know, right? Because there wasn't the chain just keeps going on and on. It doesn't stop. Okay? So intuitively, we have all three options are blocked here. Okay? Now, those of you who have been paying attention should notice something. If this is meant to be analogous to the cosmological argument, then what's the right solution? What's the obvious solution? If this is meant to be analogous to the cosmological argument, you probably want to reject premise 2, isn't it? So if you think that there is any bites at all to the cosmological argument, yeah, it does depend on the controversial premise, the principle of sufficient reason. Now, if you think that works at all, then you probably want to say that probably there's something fishy about premise 2. Maybe there's a way to make premise 2 go away. Okay? And in fact, traditionally, historically, that is the most popular solution. Okay, we'll go there in a moment later. Okay? But to the extent that you were impressed by the idea that a causal chain, a causal explanatory chain, cannot be circular, and likewise a causal explanatory chain cannot be infinite, then for very similar reasons, you're not going to be impressed by the rejection of either premise 3 or premise 4. Okay? So what happens if 2, 3, and 4 are all true? Then you have a conclusion. The conclusion is, look, if you justifiably believe P, then one of these 3 options got to be true. But I've shown you that each of these options cannot be true. They are all blocked. Therefore, you have to go back and cancel out the original. It cannot be that you were justified in believing that P. But here's the thing. P is just a stand-in. P is just a cipher. It could be literally any belief. Look around you. There are students in this room. There are people in this room. There's a belief you have too. So if this argument is right, you're not justified in believing that. Okay? Are there elephants in this room? No, there aren't. Are we justified in believing it? That there are no elephants in this room? If this argument is right, we are not justified in believing that. Okay? Now this slide here just summarizes the key points again. In a way, I've already gone through that. I just want to make sure that you have it all in one page. Okay? Now it's very important for you to appreciate how this thing works. And I hope that if you do appreciate how this thing works, it will allow you to go back and relook the cosmological argument. Okay? And maybe you'll get more out of it. Or conversely, if you think you already understood the cosmological argument, then probably that will help you in understanding this argument as well. Okay, so it was deliberate for us to choose these 2 topics that kind of mirror each other in some ways. Okay? But there are also interesting non-parallels, interesting divergences between these 2, between the cosmological argument and the regress argument. Okay, I'm not going to talk about them, but maybe if you ask me, I might do so in the blog. Okay? Anyone want to give a try? What's the most obvious kind of this analogy? I'll leave you to think about it. Okay. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 attempted solutions to the regress argument in a moment, and that will take the rest of the lesson. But there are 4 main premises to this argument, right? So the initial premise that lays out the trilemma, and then premises 2, 3, and 4, each of which blocks one of the options. So if you need to show that this argument doesn't work, what do you need to do? What is necessary for you to do? Well, you need to show that one of these premises is false. But you have 4 choices. Premise 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? Historically, all the main attention when people try to show that this argument doesn't work, all the main attention is on premises 2, 3, and 4. But let's start with premise 1 first. Is premise 1 true? Is it true that when you believe something justifiably, then either you do so on a chain of reason that ends in a belief that is not justified by appeal to some other belief, right? Analogous to non-dependent being, or that is a circular chain of reason, or that is an infinite chain of reason. Is this a true premise? Well, it's true to the extent that it is exhaustive, that nothing has been left out. And again, I hope you remember what we said earlier, 2 weeks ago, when we look at the cosmological argument. Right? If someone offers you, either you like Pepsi or you like Coke, that's not an exhaustive list of options. Because you're going to put out your hand and say, but I like Mountain Dew, right? Then how come it's not there? Okay? Now, here's one obvious way in which we might think that premise 1 is not exhaustive. What if there's an option D? Because option 1A says that we're talking about a belief that was held on the basis of a chain of reasons that ends in a belief that was held without further justification. But what if the starting belief, what if P itself was not held with any further justification? Wouldn't that be a different case? Okay. In other words, what if no chain of reasons were involved at all? What if you just believe P without further justification? Now, this is not a big problem because this really collapses into 1A again, isn't it? Because in both cases, both in the case of you simply believing P without further justification, or believing P on the basis of a chain of reasons that ends in a belief that was believed without further justification, what you really need is the possibility for there to be a belief that is held without further justification, and yet still justified. Okay? So you can collapse these two options together into 1D. You can pretend that a chain of reason can be as short as 1. Okay? So now, it would seem that if this is the case, then we really do have an exhaustive three-way here. Okay? It doesn't seem as if we have left out anything. So there is no separate need for option 1D. As I said, this argument is meant to show that our beliefs are never justified. This argument, in fact, is very, very old. It goes back to a text that was put together in Roman times by this gentleman called Sextus Empiricus. But he, in fact, saw himself merely as reporting an argument that came from a much earlier Greek philosopher. Okay? For Sextus, he wants to use this argument, among many others, to show that in every case of a debate, P versus not P, we really should suspend our judgment. Okay? We should be agnostic for everything. Okay? This word skepticism comes from a Greek word. This is just a nice little tidbit. The skeptics, that word itself means to investigators. Right? So skeptics are people who basically wave the flag of, we are investigators. We don't dogmatically assert. Because while others thought they found the truth, we know that, well, funny, we cannot say we know, so we're still investigating. Okay? We don't know, right? But he's not the only one who inherited this argument. Now, if it turns out that if knowledge requires justification and the regress argument is valid, and it is, and we accept premise 1, then knowledge is possible only if we can reject either premise 2, premise 3, or premise 4. So as I said, the rejection of each of these premises is associated with a major school of thought about justification. And in the case of premise 2, 2 schools of thought, in fact. So what I'm going to do now is to go through each of these as possible solutions, but the treatment can only be quite brief. Okay? Okay, so this is the newest one. This is the one that is the newest kid on the block. Infinitism. Very simple thought. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the first few. Premise 4 says, if you justifiably believe P, then it can't be that you did so on the basis of an infinite chain of reasons. So, infinitists basically reject this. Okay? They reject the idea that chains of justification must be finite. Historically, this is not a popular solution at all. In fact, you had to wait until more or less the 20th century to find people willing to go this way. Okay? Now, why might someone believe this? Why might someone think that this is a possible way of proceeding? What I'm going to do now is merely to give you one possible reason and then one objection against it. As I said, my treatment can only be quite brief. Okay? So, here is a basic argument against. Human beings can't hold an infinite number of thoughts. If you're going to be an infinitist, you might as well be a skeptic already. If you believe that it's possible to justify a belief by appeal to an infinite chain of reason, then you might as well be a skeptic. Why? Because the infinitist thinks that this is the way towards justification. The infinitist agrees with the other two premises. The infinitist agrees that you cannot justify a belief by appeal to beliefs that are held without further justification, and they also don't think that circular reasoning is allowable. So that means that the only option left for them is to say that a belief is justified to the extent that there is an infinite chain of reason for it. But if that is the case, then actually, according to this way of thinking, according to the opponent, we might as well be skeptics. Because surely as finite human beings, we cannot possibly hold an infinite number of thoughts in our head. Okay? Now, can you see a lack of parallel between this and the Leibniz-Clarke cosmological argument? In the case of the Leibniz-Clarke cosmological argument, the possibility of an infinite causal chain is allowed. But here, it doesn't seem to be something that worries these people. But there is this analogy. You could potentially imagine that the world, the universe, space-time continuum consists of an infinitely long causal chain. But that doesn't require you to hold this whole causal chain in your mind. It exists outside of your mind. The world could be infinite for all we know. Okay? But for infinitism to work as for justification is a lot harder. Because the underlying thought here is, in order for you to be justified by infinite chain of reasons, surely you need to have access to this infinite number of reasons. But how can you, as a finite human being, possibly have access to an infinite number of reasons? Okay? So this is not something that is obvious at all. Okay? But the infinitists could counter that. Look, there's a sense, yeah, I got that, but there is a sense in which infinitism is attractive because it does properly account for something else that is missed out by the other doctrines. It accounts for the idea that justification can come in degrees. Don't we all agree that you could be more justified to believe P than someone else to believe P? Or you could be more justified to believe P than for you to believe Q? That you have more justification for one belief as opposed to another? Okay. Now, if you think so, then infinitism gives you the machinery to express that. When you have some parts of the chain of reason, you have some degree of justification. The more you have, the more justified you are. And you are absolutely justified when you have the whole infinite chain of reason. Maybe it's a small cost to pay. Maybe what we can get from this way of thinking is that, yes, we're never absolutely justified, but at least this allows us to say that we are more justified, we're less justified. We're getting even better at justifying. Right? And over time, not just in the mind of one person, if you imagine human knowledge as a collective and ongoing enterprise, we could imagine how over time the human race accumulates more knowledge via, for instance, more justification. You could believe that. So now infinitism seems to give you the machinery to be able to say that the other doctrines don't quite give you. Okay? But there is a worry about this as well. Because it's not clear that when we say that the more reasons you have, the better justified you are, we mean to say it in the way that the infinitists think. The way that he's thinking of, that he has to think of, is something like this. Why do you believe P? Well, I believe P because Q. Why do you believe Q? I believe Q because R. He seems to think that if the more chains like this you can add, the more links to a chain like this you can add, you're more justified. Is that how we think when we say that the more reasons you have, the more justified you are? It's not obvious. Now, if you were to ask Mary, why do you believe that? What gives you the right to believe that there are eggs in the fridge? And she says that, well, first and foremost, I put them there. Secondly, I live alone. Thirdly, therefore no one can come and play pranks on me. Thirdly, I know that my sister, who likes to play pranks on me, she's away in America, so she can't fly back in time to catch me. Okay? And I know that there are no elves living in my house. There used to be, but there aren't any now. Okay? Now, these are not reasons that stack up in the way that the infinitists would want. They are independent reasons. Okay, can you all see that? Now, if it turns out that, if you think that Mary is more justified to the degree that she can say more of those kinds of things, then it's not for the reason that the infinitists would prefer. Okay, so it's not quite right that to think that just because you have more links to the chain of reasons, you are more justified. Okay, so this research project is still ongoing. There are still people who are trying to figure out if this will work. I'm not overly optimistic about it. Okay, but who knows? Maybe one of you is. Let's try another one. This one targets premise 3. If you justifiably believe P, then it can't be that you did so on the basis of a circular chain of reason. Is it possible for us to reject this? Well, some people have tried. Okay? So this doctrine is called Coherentism. Historically, it fared better than infinitism, but it's still less popular than foundationalism. Okay? Now, how does this work? Imagine that the justification of a belief is not straightforwardly about how you can cite another belief to justify it. Imagine that what's really going on is that a belief is justified to the extent that it belongs to a larger collection of beliefs that are coherent with each other, that kind of mutually implicate each other. Okay. Right? Now, it may turn out that under such circumstances, the chain of inferences work in both directions. Okay? It's not quite that there is something else, some other belief that straightforwardly justifies this belief, but rather, this belief somehow both lends support to other beliefs, and the other beliefs lend support to it. You know that phrase, right? If we don't hang together, we hang separately. So this is the way these beliefs think. Okay? When we hang together, we are all stronger. Now, you can tell a nice homily about how Genghis Khan tried to teach his sons to stay together by giving them a bunch of arrows, and they can't bring them apart together. Okay? Give you an arrow, you can break it apart easily. Give you 10 of them together, it becomes much harder for you to break it apart. Very homely thought, and the background idea here has a similar kind of background intuition. Maybe we're barking out the wrong tree. We shouldn't be thinking of this belief is justified by reference to that belief, as if it's so simple, as if there are only two involved. And even when we add the next one, it goes in a linear way, just one after another. What if it turns out that they lend mutual support to each other? Okay? So it's not as if I stand here, you stand on my shoulders, and I'm supporting you. But the picture may well be the two of us are both in the precipice, over a precipice, and we lean against each other, and because we lean against each other, we are both that much the safer. Okay? Now, a couple of things that we need to be aware of. Don't confuse coherentism as a doctrine about justification with coherentism as a doctrine about truth. Earlier I said that Mary's belief that there are eggs in her fridge is true just to the extent that there really are eggs in the fridge. Traditionally, we call that a correspondence theory. The name is not important. Okay? Well, the basic idea is that if there really are people in this auditorium, then our belief that there are people in this auditorium is true. That's all there is to it. Okay? But there is an alternative doctrine that says that a belief is true just in case it belongs to a larger body of beliefs that somehow all mutually implicate each other. Now, it is not an obvious or fundamental and attractive doctrine as a doctrine about truth. Okay? But here we're not talking about truth. We are talking only about justification. Okay? So you could believe that, you could be a correspondence theorist about truth. You could believe that, suppose I believe that there are people in this room. That belief is true just in case there really are people in this room. But nonetheless, you might be a coherentist about justification. So when someone asks you, why do you believe that there are people in this room? And I say, look, I look around me, there are all these shapes that I see. And I ask the guy beside me, he also says that there are all these shapes beside him. And we pinch ourselves and we check and we look at the time and just to make sure that there are no else fooling us. And I check my timetable. Yeah, I'm supposed to be in this lecture at this time. I have all these classmates, right? All these, no, it's not quite that somehow they all lend support to one belief in a straightforward way, but rather all these beliefs all hang together. They support each other. Okay? So the sensible thought that comes behind is, yes, that's right. We don't ordinarily, unless in a philosophy seminar, think of individual beliefs as if we just form that one belief in the middle of nowhere. In fact, we often form a whole set of beliefs all at the same time. Look around you. If I were to ask you to sort of rattle off what possible beliefs you can have at this moment, that's limitless. You can go on forever. Okay? Now, there are going to be questions about whether or not belonging to a coherent body of beliefs is sufficient to justify it, or that is necessary, or that is necessarily sufficient, but these are details now. These are details and technicalities we'll leave it for the researchers to worry about. Okay? But here's the problem. The problem is that even ordinarily, we do think that some beliefs are more secure than others. We are more confident about some beliefs than others. Think of the trolley case. When we first encounter it, we say, look, imagine a train that's going to crash into 5 people unless you switch the thing and then it's going to go the other side and kill one. Most of us think that, okay, if it's so bad, it's at least permissible to switch. Okay? But if I ask you the same scenario about the organ harvest, you are a doctor and you could harvest the healthy organs of one healthy guy to save 5 other people, most of us say that, no, that doesn't sound right. Okay? Now, if you are a consistent utilitarian who is impressed by the first trolley problem, and if you can't tell some other story, then you will say, well, given utilitarianism, I guess it's okay for the guy to harvest the organs. Right? But why is it that most of us, because most of us are not utilitarians, kind of shudder at the thought? Because it seems to us that we are more ready to believe that it's not okay for us to harvest the organs from the 1 to give to the 5. And if we had to give up utilitarianism as a cause for maintaining that belief, we would rather do that. Okay? So that means that some beliefs are more secure than others, even in our own minds. And coherentism doesn't quite capture that idea. If we want to fully capture that idea, there are some things that are really more at the bottom that support others, and they're not meant to be supported by others. Okay? Now, that idea is not well captured in this picture now, because this picture is all about mutual support. But if it turns out that there really are a bottom that supports the others, then coherentism can't be right. Okay? Here's another problem. What if there are alternative but equally coherent bodies of belief? What if I can tell a completely different story that conflicts with the story that you originally believe in? So here is one story. You're sitting in an LT listening to a lecture about epistemology. Right? We're all human beings with flesh and bones. Okay? You're all students in NUS. There's a whole bunch of beliefs in that package. But here's another story. This story is, in fact, this whole thing doesn't exist. This thing is a hologram. Okay, we are in fact living in the 27th century, right? Captain Picard is just running a simulation on his holodeck, and we are all simulations that were created by the holodeck. And guess what? That story is fully coherent within itself too. Okay, here's another story. In fact, we're all here in NUS, but there are invisible elves sitting beside you right now. Okay? And in fact, these lights don't work because of electricity. Electricity is all fake. It's really little trolls that are, they are lighting up this place. Okay? And guess what? It doesn't take a lot of effort to make that story fully consistent with itself too. It will be a fantastical story. But we can tell a story that is fantastical and yet coherent. But if belonging to a coherent body of beliefs is what makes a belief justified, then theoretically, it's possible that my belief that we are here in NUS in a lecture room could well be just as justified as this other belief that says that we are in fact in a holodeck, just as much as this other belief that says that there are elves in this room right now. Okay? And it seems wacky to go that direction. Okay? This is going to take a long time. I'm not going to explain this. Maybe I'll explain this on a blog. Okay. Now, I do want to say one good thing about coherentism. Okay? Coherentism is not an attractive picture of justification, but actually it offers a very attractive picture of the idea of progress of knowledge over time. But how we come to acquire knowledge over time is not the same as how we are justified in believing whatever we are believing in. Okay? I'll leave this as something for you to think about. This very nice parable that's told by this nice old gentleman by the name of Otto Neurath. To chew upon it yourself, is a nice picture of a ship that is ongoing in the sea. It has never reached the dry dock. It will never reach the dry dock. But even as it's going on the sea, the sailors are always repairing it. It began as a small boat. They acquire more pieces of wood along the way, and they continue building and building upon it, even as they are ongoing. It does seem as if the human enterprise of knowledge is a bit like this. At no point do we simply have beliefs that are so firm and so foundational that we say that, okay, here we go, this is where we start, we just build from here. We're always merely trying to improve upon what we already have, with reference to what we already do have. Right? At no point do we, as it were, stand outside of the whole collective human enterprise and say that this is a fulcrum. From here, everything goes. We're always in the middle of it. Okay? So, Coherentism, as an idea about how knowledge progresses over time, may well make a lot of sense. But as a theory of justification, it seems to fall short. Okay, last two. Foundationalism and Contextualism. I'll begin with the simpler one. Okay, and then we'll do the more important one. Simpler one is simply this. Look, the idea is that we need to reject premise 2. We need to find a way to say that you can have a belief that is justified even though it has no further justification. It all boils down to that, isn't it? Okay? Okay? So, both foundationalism and coherentism, oh, there's a mistake there. Foundationalism and contextualism affirm premises 3 and 4 but reject premise 2. Some beliefs are just justified without further justification. But how does this work? Okay, here is the simpler version of it. This is the more, Abing version of it. Then we'll follow by the more sophisticated version. Okay, what's the Abing version of it? Okay, so you are studying in NUS. Okay, and you say you're really hungry, and you say to your friend, "Hey, let's can please go Clementi for dinner tonight?" Then your friend say, "Okay, sure. How to go? Walk?" Okay. Then you say, "No lah, take bus 96. What are you talking about?" Right? But how you know bus 96 will take us there? How you know? All right. They say, "Are you kidding me? We've always taken bus 96 to Clementi." Okay, what are you talking about? And say, "But what?" This is where he reveals that he's not a true being, right? What justification? You have that the service still exists, and that is running now. Okay? And even if service exists, how you know that the bus we bought will bring us there? Okay? Have you been reading philosophy again? Just being difficult. Okay? Okay? Now, what's the story here? If you think there's something weird about this picture, you should, apart from the fact that the word justification appears there, which is totally weird, okay? But drop that part of it. What's weird about it? If you are here, you're studying in NUS and your friend asks you, "Shall we go to Clementi?" I don't think you will get into a fight over whether anyone is justified to believe that 96 will take you to Clementi. If you do get into those fights, you have issues. Okay? Okay? Why? Now, here's a very simple thought. What is called for when we ask for justification depends on the context. The context in which the demand for justification is made. Sometimes the context is a very easygoing context. When your friend asks you, shall we go to Clementi and we will take 96 to go there, you don't say, how do you know? How do you know 96 will bring us to Clementi? You just reveal yourself to be a crazy and kind of boorish person, okay? Right? Yes, the demand for justification can be quite demanding. Sometimes you could be in a, you could be in a philosophy seminar, you could be in a science research project, and the demand for justifying some of the claims, or in the court of law, could be quite high. But if you are wondering whether or not you're going to walk to Clementi or take bus 96 to go to Clementi, I don't think any of us are going to fight over this. If you do, you have other problems than justification. Okay, here's a simple thought. Okay? So the idea is, some things are just properly assumed in a context. We all know that bus 96 brings us to Clementi. Okay? We all know that if you want to go to Sunset Way, you can take 151. And we all know that D1 will be crowded whenever you want to take it. We all know that, okay? Now this is Icon. Depending on what's the issue, some questions are just worth not asking because their answers are reasonably assumed in the context. Okay? In other words, it's perfectly okay to believe some things without further justification. For instance, that bus 96 will bring you to Clementi. That D1 will most likely be crowded when you need to go to U-Town. Right? And so on and so forth. And therefore, to appeal to these beliefs, to justify other beliefs, within the context. Okay? And as I said, what's reasonable will depend on context. If you are in an upper division, 4th year, graduate seminar, philosophy seminar, epistemology seminar, this is not good enough. Okay? But if you're talking to your friend, wondering whether to go for lunch now or later, whether it's a good idea to try to line up for the Yong Tau Fu store because it's going to take forever, you don't need to worry too much. Okay? Is this a good reply? Okay? Now, in a sense, this reply is a very nice reply, but it's also a reply that is called refusing to do philosophy. Okay? Okay? Here's a problem. Are the contextualists ultimately talking about social acceptability? As I said, if you are the kind of person who press your friends who ask you to go to Clementi for dinner, and you press them for justifying their belief that 96 will bring you to Clementi, you have issues. But your problem is not epistemic. Your problem is social. Your problem is that you don't know how to relate to people. That's not the same as saying that you are irrational. That's not exactly the same. Okay? Can you all see that? Now, social acceptability is one thing, but could it be that justification is justification, social acceptability is social acceptability? Or are they the same thing? Is there a difference? Right? So could it be that if you are a contextualist, you need to make the bold claim that all there is to justification is social acceptability? Okay? Now that's not obviously true. It's probably radical in some sense, but it's not completely wacky and crazy too. Okay? And could it be that all we have is social acceptability? Everything else is like the illusory free will stuff. Okay? Secondly, here's the more worrisome thing. So what does happen in the philosophy seminar? You can't just say, I have left hand, I have right hand, so obviously I know I have two hands and therefore skepticism is false. Is that good enough? By the way, there was a famous philosopher who argued like that. I know I have a left hand, I know I have a right hand, therefore I know that there are at least two things that exist in the universe, therefore I know some things, therefore skepticism is false. Okay? Does that make sense as an argument? What happens when the highest demands are being made? Okay? Now, this is where we come down to the final solution, the one that is historically the most popular. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, partly because when the first set of arguments were made towards this position, in fact, do you know how that person argued towards this position? This is Aristotle. Aristotle argued towards foundationalism by essentially saying that, look, regress argument. Contextualism, no. Infinitism, no. Therefore, foundationalism. Okay? So, there is a sense in which it's not as if we can tell a straightforward story in its own favor. The reason why people believe in foundationalism is mostly because they think that contextualism and coherentism and infinitism don't really work. This is the only option left. Now, of course, if you want to think of a positive reason, it will be because it's analogous to the cosmological argument. And there is something to it. Think of the idea that our system of our knowledge, this is our system of knowledge, is a structure consisting of two kinds of beliefs. Basic beliefs, beliefs that are justified in whatever context without any further justification. And non-basic beliefs, beliefs that are justified by appeal to other beliefs. Okay? Now, if you imagine that the structure of human knowledge has a bottom, so these are beliefs that are justified even though they are not justified with reference to some other belief. Now remember, your self-existent being, so they are exactly like self-existent being, right? They are already justified. Okay? You may say they are self-justifying, but that may not add anything to the picture. Okay? Other things are justified with reference to them. Okay? So this is foundationalism. Okay? Famous foundationalist, Aristotle, Descartes. So imagine the edifice of human knowledge as if a structure that has a bottom. And the bottom holds everything up. Okay? I'm going to very quickly speed through two problems of this. And you can discuss this in class if you want. First problem. This is what foundationalism says. Every justified belief is either basic or non-basic. And if it's basic, it's already justified. If it's non-basic, it's justified by appeal to other beliefs, ultimately in a basic belief. Is the belief that foundationalism is true itself basic or non-basic? This is hard. And whichever way you go is hard, is bad. Okay? Here's another problem. What are the candidates for basic beliefs? I'm going to finish in two minutes. Most modern philosophers will say that, look, there are three kinds of basic beliefs. Conceptual or logical truths, sense perception, and memory. And now we have this problem. If you think that a whole bunch of things that we do supposedly know are justified, think of all the things that you think we know. Then you need foundations that are both strong and wide. You need them to be strong because you need to actually believe that they are already justified. You need them to be wide because they need to be able to support all the other beliefs that you already have, that you think are true and justified. Okay? But now you have a problem. Among the three items there, conceptual and logical truths has the best claim to be justified, just on the face of it. People even think they are self-justifying. But sense perception, memory, you may think that they are not obviously justified already as they stand. Okay? But can you make do only with conceptual and logical truths and support everything else we know? No, you can't. We know that Iceland is an island. There is no way to prove that Iceland is an island from merely conceptual and logical truths. Okay? So that means that it's got to be wide. But if it's wide, then it's not clear that you'll be strong enough. So you have a dilemma here. We need to be wide, and that means we need to include, for instance, all three kinds. But then we worry that some of it is not strong enough. We need to be strong, in which case we may have to narrow the base, in which case some of the beliefs we think we know, we may not know after all. Okay? Okay, so that's all there is. I know this is a bit of a mind bender. Come down and talk to me if you want. I'll see you guys next week. Yeah.